Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here is your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning and welcome back to Faith in Our Hometown for another Sunday morning. My guests this morning are going to be Jay and Julie St. Clair, who are the Executive Director and the Operations Director at God's Resort of Joplin. God's Resort operates in the middle of town, kind of holding down that central corridor, helping make the neighborhood a little bit stronger by providing some transitional housing for some folks who need it. And so many of the folks in our community might sometimes need a hand up in terms of perhaps maybe getting out of jail, perhaps having some changes in life, leaving an abusive situation. And sometimes they need a place to stay where they can kind of start figuring out how to live independently again and do that in such a way that's going to improve the dignity of their lives. And so we're going to be back with Jay and Julie in just a few moments. We're going to cut for a moment to a Mercy Minute. We'll be right back, so please don't go away. We'll be right back with God's Resort and Jay and Julie St. Clair.
The different bariatric surgical options here at Mercy Joplin includes laparoscopic room-wide gastric bypass, laparoscopic sleeve gastrectomy, and laparoscopic lap band placement. In addition, we also offer revisional laparoscopic surgeries for those patients that have had previous bariatric procedures but have had failures. The surgical procedure of choice will vary with different individuals, and so that's why our team will work with the patient on an individual basis to determine which procedure is the best fit for them. All three of the bariatric procedures that we offer here at Mercy Joplin have a long track record of proven safety and efficacy. The best procedure for the individual has to be a decision to be decided between the patient and the physician.
Well, thanks for joining us again this morning for Faith in Our Hometown. Jay and Julie St. Clair, the directors over at God's Resort. So first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Well, we've been in Joplin all of our adult life, raised our family here, and we're ministers at College Heights Christian Church for over 30 years. And during that time, we were able to establish a ministry for folks who are struggling through College Heights, and we called it God's Resort. And it was basically because the area that we were working in was called the last resort.
Wow.
And so it was such a hard place to live that the police were there about 90 times a month.
Wow.
And so it was the epic center of everything that you don't want in Joplin, and you certainly don't want to live there. And so we just started showing up. And as we started showing up, God started working.
There you go.
Yep.
So you were down the central corridor, which was a little rougher several years ago.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. Living down there myself, every once in a while, the things get a little exciting, but I just keep saying, everybody's like, oh, you live in a bad neighborhood. And I'm like, really? Do I? Because to me, it doesn't seem like that bad because I live there.
Right.
But I'm really glad to know that, because you've been doing this a lot longer. I've been doing a job in 11 years, so I'm glad you kind of tamed the neighborhood down a little bit while when you guys brought some of that stuff in. So what do you do at God's Resort? So talk a little bit about what happens, or what's a typical day like for you guys?
The main thing that we focus on are people who are sent to us either by agencies or by other Christians or other people that call. They're trying to help somebody who's homeless or somebody who's just come out of a treatment center, maybe perhaps just come out of prison. Maybe it's a parent that's trying to get a child back, get custody back, and so they need to establish a home and show that they can. And so in that process, we take application. They're in our community center at 1501 South Pearl. The old Joplin Performing Arts building is now our community center, and our offices are there, and that's where we connect with people relationally. But people come and make application. We actually have a little bit of a waiting list now for people to get into an apartment. And we have 3 requirements that we initially give, and that's that if if there has been an addiction, that they are at least 6 months clean. Not everybody who comes to us, though, comes with that particular struggle.
Say about half the folks who come for transitional housing
some
has
kind of substance problem. Yeah.
And then the other half are just folks who have struggled with generational poverty mostly.
Okay, so that's the first thing. You just want somebody in that route to be substance free for 6 months. What were your other two?
The other two are they have to have a job or an income to be able to pay rent, because we realize that, and we want them to understand that a roof over their head is the most important thing to be able to get to the next thing that God has for them, we believe.
Sure.
And so putting behind them the things that they've struggled with and being ready for the next better thing, they need the roof over their head.
Sure. And you want to make sure that you can maintain your properties and do all those things. And obviously,
and we want to bring
somebody who doesn't have a job, who doesn't have an income, can't be in transitional housing because their needs are different than what you're providing.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So
we are not emergency housing.
Right, we say that not everybody's ready for God's resort. And so, and then that third piece would be, do they want a relationship with people? Because
Social capital.
Yeah, well, community is an important thing, and I mean that's especially true for all of us in faith communities.
Yes.
We know the importance of it. I mean,
Yes.
as I always say to my people, it's just like, I think if Jesus wanted us to do it on our own, we wouldn't have all these churches.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
right.
and that's why community matters, because we can support each other in our struggles and in our successes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I have loved personally about the leadership of God's Resort is there's a board of people from different churches that actually serve in the decision making, and that's been from the very beginning 11 years ago. Yeah. So it's been a very special place.
It's a lot of, with many advisors is great victory, so if it just depended on us, it would be a very good thing. But when you have a group of people who are committed to providing relationship and safe, dignified housing for people, and the resources of not just God's Resort, but the broader community.
Right.
So we don't want to duplicate services. No. We want to be a part of what God is doing in this community to help people. And so we like to see ourselves as connectors of people to people, beginning with this little enclave we have, but also spreading out to other churches and
well, you use one of my favorite words, and that's dignified. Okay.
Yeah.
It's so much is about the dignity of the human being.
Absolutely.
How do we raise people up? How do we raise people up to, to live, in a manner that they really feel good, like they're doing their thing, and for all of them of faith, of course, doing their thing for themselves and for God.
Exactly.
How do we help them to do that, which is an
Absolutely.
important thing.
Yeah.
And that's possible at God's Resort because there are currently 75 Christians, whether that's a family or a business, that give monthly that help subsidize the rent so that it can be very reasonable for them. Of course, coming out of jail or prison or a treatment center, most of them usually have past child support due, or they owe Empire Electric, and can't turn on utilities. So in our reasonable rent, all utilities are paid. And part of how we know they're ready to transition is when they've paid those things off, they've learned to budget, live under a budget, met some goals, and they now are ready to take on utilities. And so we're loving partnering with people like Habitat for Humanity and actually Shubert Mitchell to help them have their own homes and be able to transition like that.
Now, I'm assuming then that you, as part of the ministry, then help them, as a community, to look at those things and to start budgeting and to do all those things that, that some people never grew up doing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, people are not poor because of what they don't have. That's the fallacy of the culture that's centered on money. People struggle with poverty because of who they don't know and what they don't know. So if we can make God's Resort an intersection where people can meet people that they would never meet in just the way we've ghettoized poverty. And so these people live here and these people live here, and neither do they meet except maybe passing in Walmart. But we want to make it a relational intersection. and then provide through that context of relationship the kind of information, the kind of love that they need to get where they wouldn't get if they didn't have that.
Well, I think that is wonderful in terms of those parts. So give me a recent success story, for example, just because I know our viewers love hearing stories, about, okay, so how does this look in the concrete?
Yes, so Mark and Jen came to us with 2 little children.
And 5 bags of Walmart clothing in their
4 years ago, and they had 5 Walmart bags in a backpack, and that was it. And they've been there, and through a lot of hard work, a lot of love, a lot of patience on every part. Relationships take patience.
Sure.
It takes humility. We're not there to fix anybody. We haven't been able to fix ourselves, so we're not going to be going around fixing
still working
people.
on me too.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
That's right. So it's not about fixing people, but it is about being present, being in the moment, recognizing the weaknesses that we all have, sharing some of that, but recognizing that Christ is the answer for all of us. Not pushing him on, he doesn't push himself on anybody, but being available, just being available in the incarnational piece of what it means to be, a follower of his. Letting people be drawn that versus pushing it.
Sure.
And so that's what's
And I'm
happening.
going to guess. I'm going to ask a question here, but because I'm making an assumption, but I'm sure that you don't have to. Christian is not one of the things on the list.
No.
When you're doing your intakes and you're
No.
trying to see people, that was those 3 things you mentioned,
Right.
and obviously religion wasn't one of those. But obviously, for any of us who believe in something or are doing a ministry because of that, we don't make secrets out of what we do.
No.
We know they know who we are, they know who we belong to, and all that kind of good stuff. But you would not deny somebody who wasn't Christian
No.
that transitional housing either, as long as
No.
they fit the other criteria.
We
correct?
want them.
Yeah.
We want them because everybody just needs love,
Sure.
and that's what we have to give. We have an overabundance of love, a supply that can't run out, and so we have several people right now that do not have a faith in God or certainly Christ, but it's good. We're glad they're there. We're glad they're there.
And again, this is what I keep saying to some of our folks who sometimes worry about that. It's like, well, are we doing enough to evangelize? And I'm just like, well, what do you think? Just handing somebody a plate of food and smiling is doing. That's evangelizing. It doesn't necessarily have to
Give
be.
a cup of cold water in my name.
Exactly. What do you think that is, other than a corporate work of mercy, as we call it? To make sure that that just people are being cared for.
There's a lot
because of who you belong to, not because of who they belong to, but because of who you belong
exactly
to.
who we are.
Exactly.
And a lot of folks have reason to be afraid of religion.
Yeah.
There is plenty of reasons to be afraid, have a fear of religion, and so we're basically believing that what God says is true. Perfect love casts out all fear. And if we can just be the presence of Jesus at God's resort and love people, my goodness, you can't lose.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking this morning with Jay and Julie St. Clair, who are the directors over at God's Resort of Joplin, a transitional housing facility here in the Joplin area and more toward the downtown area. And we are going to be right back after a quick break, so please don't go away. Stay with us.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
So thanks for not flipping the channel to anywhere else. We're really glad that you joined us for these Sunday mornings, and I really love the conversations that I get to have with other people from the area, because we live, it's just a few blocks from each other,
awesome.
but, and work a few blocks from each other, but we haven't met each other until today. So, I think this is great. I love knowing the folks in the neighborhood, and I love knowing what's going on in the neighborhood. And so we were talking a little bit before the break about, that some of it's done out of the perspective that we come from. So who came up with the idea? How did that come out? Because as you said, this started kind of out of College Heights, as an idea a long time ago. So how did that whole thing get rolling, and how do you keep sustaining it?
Well, Rob Robertson and his family owned Arnett Chevrolet for years. They ended up selling the dealership and reinvesting in property, and ended up buying these Pearl apartments. And as Rob wanted to invest in the property and make some money, he realized he was going to have to do some sweat equity. And as he did his work around the community, he was pushing a grocery cart through the neighborhood, picking up trash, and a drug addict came out of one of the apartments. Rob's all sweaty and dirty, and the guy's name was Happy, and that was his nickname. And Happy says, "Rob, you look like one of us. You belong here." And he said it was like God spoke to him. You belong here. And he came over to the church where we were ministering at College Heights, and he said, "Get in my truck, I want to show you something." And so we had been praying about a neighborhood to put some roots down in and really love people in a more messy way, more intentional way. And as we drove by these apartments, I just knew that's what we had been praying about. And so Rob came back to the office a couple of weeks later, and we found ourselves on our knees and crying out to God. And as we were praying, the name God's Resort versus the last resort came to our hearts, and that's how it got its strange name.
Yeah.
So it was a God name.
Yeah.
And then he said, pick any of these buildings and do ministry out of it. So we chose a blue house. So if you drive down Pearl Street and 14th Street, you'll see blue doors. That's in honor of our 10-year anniversary. And the ministry started in a blue house. So we just started showing up, doing things for kids and GED classes, cooking classes, all kinds of really practical things.
And then just really exciting things that have happened this last year is that David Humphrey and some other major donors have come along beside us, and we're going to build our first new construction, 2 5-plex units. So we'll have our first new construction. And Schuber Mitchell, they're building a single-family 3-bedroom dwelling. And so back to the Isbels.
So maybe you won't have your waiting list if you got, we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
So back to the Isbels, the
Which is Mark
success
and
story.
Jen.
Mark and Jen. Mark is now the general manager at Qdoba.
Okay.
They're across from Target, and their family is doing fantastic, and they're going to be living in this new Schuber Mitchell home, and then we're hoping in the next year and a half, transition to buying their own home. And so it went from complete homelessness and desperation to within a year and a half, I'm sure they're going to have their own home.
Well, and that's what I think most people of good, just people who wish other people well. I think that's really what everybody wants for everybody else.
Yes.
I think everybody gets frustrated with this whole, well, people just aren't working and they aren't trying and they do all that stuff. But those of us who really work in the trenches know that a lot of people are trying, and that sometimes it's just they need a break. And this is what this is. It's
Father
just,
Jay, they need people.
They need other people to help them.
That's it. And so, when we just get down there and love people where they are, not because we're better, but because who we are, like you said.
Well, let's face it, any different sequence of events could have landed any of us in the same spot.
I actually thought that.
And people who can't seem to understand that sometimes frustrate me, but I really believe that with all my heart and soul, is
We
that
have a
sometimes
little
it's just that
saying we say at God's Resort that we're all broken, and we all live in a broken world and get hit by the falling debris.
Yeah.
So none of us are exempt,
We're all
and that's another really wonderful thing to me, is that the people who come alongside and help volunteer and do all kinds of things to give people rides and counsel and encourage, cook meals, because we have a Sunday evening service where we offer a meal every week. Those people are very transparent about their pasts and about where they've been and how hard they had to work to get to where they are. And
so we brag on God every Sunday night.
every Sunday night, somebody tells their story.
well, if you're going to boast, you know what to boast in, right? Exactly. So, I love when you were talking about the fact, with that story about, you look like you belong here. I love that, because that's one of those things that Pope Francis keeps, saying to his priests all around the world. It's just like, okay, guys, if you don't smell like the sheep, then you're not doing your job.
That's right.
You know, if you do not know your people in the neighborhood, you know, then how are you doing your job?
Yeah, I remember
You know?
Jesus said, "My sheep know my voice."
Exactly.
And so that means he's hung around them. And so if we can be with people and people can be with us and we can be with the Lord, lots of good things can happen.
Yeah. So you got these 3 new, units planned. Which would increase your capacity by another 13 units?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
5, and 3. Yeah, okay. My math is not always good in the morning. But see, that's one thing big on the horizon. What other things you got going that you're excited about, that you're turning the corner on or dreaming about?
We have a life transitions coordinator that comes on full time next month, and so he is doing it now, but we've been able to, through adequate funding, to bring him on full time, and so he'll just help people see where they are, where they want to be, and how to get there, and create that
Set goals.
plan that people
Dream a
can
little.
dream and then follow a plan with some resources
Well, sure.
and some encouragement of folks around them to get where they couldn't get by themselves.
He's also going to be starting on June the 16th of this year, a recovery meeting in our community center, and that's from noon to 1 every Friday. So that's open to anybody.
It'll be a 12-step meeting, and but it won't just cover drugs and alcohol. It'll cover any struggle that you have that you could use.
So any addiction of any kind.
Yeah, you could use those
And there's,
within.
yeah. Well, it's a good spiritual guide. I don't care whether you call it addiction, and I know addiction's very different than sin, but it's they're twins.
They are
they're
twins.
in terms of that. So anybody that can use that kind of a spiritual assistance to make the difference in life and let God help them is amazing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely amazing.
So we literally, the core group that has come together, again, it's all about relationships, probably have 70 to 80 years of sobriety between them. That's going to help folks who ever come to just be encouraged.
I'm gonna ask another question because it just popped in my mind from what you said earlier. I'm gonna bet that some of your regular donors, I'm gonna bet that some of those regular donors were in the same situation years ago that some of the people that they're now trying to assist and give that hand up to. Yeah.
Definitely.
I love Grateful Hearts. As Grateful Hearts know that they were given.
To whom much is given, much is
exactly,
required.
they were given a gift, and what you give as a gift, what you receive as a gift, give as a gift.
Yes.
And I love that when you see that life continue to be passed forward. Because you've made a difference in somebody else's life, and now they want to turn and do the same thing.
Yes, it is amazing.
So if somebody wanted to help, or volunteer to those things, we got we're going to put your, web address up on there, www.godsresortjoplin.org.
Yes.
Okay, and they can get in touch with you. What kind of things what folks might be able to do if they get in touch with you?
We always need help cleaning in between transitions, cleaning
Sure.
apartments. Maintenance is, of course, with buildings and managing homes. There's always maintenance or bigger projects if anybody has, especially a skill. But we'll do it. We'll take anything from mowing a yard to painting, sweeping, to
Loving on people.
loving on people. Yeah. So rides. Many people come without cars. I would say maybe a third of our residents currently own a car. I love the resident last night who bragged on God. He said, "I actually learned to ride a bike at God's Resort so I could get to and from school and work."
Good.
So somebody had to teach him in
How
his
to ride the
20s how to
bike,
ride a bike.
Yeah.
So there's just all kinds of things that.
One of the cool things, Father Jay, is that has transpired in the last year is we've had some retired nurses who have decided they want to put their hearts to work
And their
at God's
experience.
Resort. So we have faith community nurses.
They actually went to their training.
Yeah, they're actually
It used to be called parish nursing.
Yeah, right.
yes.
Uh-huh.
And so we have.
Well, we still kind of call it that, but because
Well,
I got it.
So we have our own parish nurses.
nursing, yeah.
And so it's just really been awesome to
Yes.
they don't do obviously diagnosis or
Sure,
treatment.
but they can help people or
They become advocates,
Yeah.
and they
Listen
go
on the
to doctor's appointments with them, and we take for granted the relationships we have when we go through health crises, and yet to have those extra pair of ears, and especially ears that know exactly what they're listening to, and that's been a great blessing too in the last year. So people, maybe a retired nurse would be interested in faith community. Yeah.
Well, we've been talking this morning with Jay and Julie St. Clair about God's Resort, which is a transitional housing ministry that's run in the middle of Joplin. Again, if anybody wants to volunteer, www.godsresortjoplin.org. Okay, and again, lots of things there that can happen if you want to love on somebody. There's a spot to do it. So we're going to take a break now for a Mercy Minute. We're going to be right back, so don't go away.
The SANE program, or Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner program, is a program established to provide a coordinated, specialized care to patients who, or women or men, who've been the victim of sexual assault.
The SANE program is really designed to be a collaborative community response to sexual assault.
It's really important to make sure that it's not just the report or the forensic, but they get all of the testing that might be needed for their health.
It's also important to know that you don't need to know if you want to press charges or not. We don't get law enforcement involved unless you request it.
I just want to express to the victim that it is never your fault. You always have the right to say no, and that it's your body. So if you say yes one time, it doesn't mean every time.
I think it's important that sexual assault victims remember they've been victims of a crime, and crime victims do not pay for those services.
Well, thanks again for joining us for another Sunday morning here in Faith in Our Hometown. We had a delightful morning this morning talking with Jay and Julie St. Clair from God's Resort and their ministry in the middle of town, which basically provides transitional housing. Sometimes we don't think about, those of us that are blessed, don't think about all the different things that we take for granted, like making a budget and maintaining a house, because our parents taught us some of those things. And sometimes it just takes somebody else, if you didn't learn some of those things in the early part of life, to come along and teach you the later part in life. And so that's one of the reasons why they do the work that they do. That's one of the reasons why they're involved in that area of town. That's one of the reasons why they will provide transitional housing for folks who need it, folks who might be getting out of jail, or who might be trying to get a child back, or any of those other reasons why sometimes people might struggle. And they just need a little bit of human support as they do it. So, Jay and Julie, we're glad you're there. We're glad you're in the middle of town doing what you're doing. Thanks for keeping the neighborhood special, okay? Join us next week for Faith in Our Hometown. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Father Jay.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.